Okay, here we
That
are.
intro is so loud, isn't it? Welcome to episode 7. My name's Jay
It's
Katz.
episode 8.
Gee whiz, I'm
We're
going
moving
backwards
through.
in time.
We're moving
Well,
through.
welcome to episode 8. My name's Jay Katz, and I'm joined by my wife, Aspasia, and this is for the Untold Radio Network. And this is Down South Anomalies. And we have an exceptional guest in our midst.
We only do exceptional.
Yeah, but this is the real gentleman of Australian ufology.
Yes.
Very humble and yet fully qualified.
Mm-hmm.
Roger
Stankovic.
Stankovic.
Is it Stankovic or Stankovic?
Stankovic, but
Stankovic,
you can pronounce
yes.
it.
Roger
Yes, it's
Stankovic.
spelled
I know that's
without an H.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, Roger is the Australian New Zealand Director for MUFON Down Under.
He is.
But not only that, this is one of the most highly qualified individuals in the world to be a UFO field investigator.
Yeah, let's
Now,
go through
hold
it.
on.
We've
Let me
got to go
do the
through.
accolades and calm down. So this man has investigated over 200 cases.
Yes.
Very early in the piece, he was a member of the extraordinary APRO.
Mm-hmm.
And then went on to 2015, becoming the director for MUFON down here. He is a neuroscientist. He has actually written some incredible papers that we'll go into.
Yes.
In terms of just assisting people out there in the real world with what could be major physiological problems. And he's a musician. He's a creative like we are.
Semi-professional.
Well,
don't say that. You know, I
well,
want
you're
to
a musician. You just don't do it full time.
Yeah, I want to delete the word hobby. I want to remove that.
Job.
Yeah. And your day job is you're an astounding teacher and lecturer, and you've been in numerous podcasts, radio programs, television programs on this topic, but you're going to be featuring in a groundbreaking series called Close Encounters Down Under that premieres in Britain early next year and will be brought out here by mid-year to the 7 network, but we'll speak a little bit about that later on.
We'll let everybody know when.
Roger, what I want to ask you first off to give us your qualifications and what you bring into the field. And then I believe you were like a victim of the tripwire where a lot of us who have become obsessively interested in this topic are, and that is you had an incident very early in the piece. So let's go into your qualifications, and thank you so much for joining us on Down South Anomalies.
Yes, so as far as my academic qualifications, Jamie, I in the late 70s I enrolled in a Bachelor of Science degree at Sydney University, and I struggled. I was very immature at that stage, and that's later on that photo.
Okay.
But I did a Bachelor of Science degree. That's about this is me on the bottom row in the middle there.
Looking very earnest.
That one there? Yep.
I love that shot. That actually, that shows your determination, that picture.
So were you already interested in UFOs then?
That's the age I was. I was about 14, I think, when I saw my first and only UFO, actually, at my parents' property. But just going back to my qualifications and academic background. So I did the BSc. Then I became a hospital scientist as a career, and later did a PhD at Sydney Uni. I started in 97, and then became a neuroscientist there for about 15 years at Blackburn Building at Sydney University, which is now torn down, and they've got a new building there. And then I decided to get out of the laboratory and actually do some teaching. Well, I'm still back in the laboratory, but I wanted to do teaching for quite some time, and I'm lecturing at TAFE now in molecular biology, statistics, and pathology and microscopy. So that's my background as far as the academic side of things is. Going back to that,
maybe we'll just, if I just can interrupt you, excuse me, can we get your thesis up and tell us about your PhD thesis here?
Yeah. So that was on an experimental mouse model. So what we do, I got some mice which were had a gene knocked out, had 2 genes knocked out called metallothionein, and these 2 genes produced proteins which actually defend the body against heavy metals. So when you are exposed to heavy metals, they can actually accumulate in nerve cells in your body.
Right.
And when they accumulate in your nerve cells in your body, they can actually damage the DNA and cause mutations and stuff like that. So we looked at mercury, and we had this hypothesis that it could be that the mercury in dental amalgam can actually cause or simulate motor neuron disease-like symptoms in adults that have tooth extractions and stuff like that. When you mobilize mercury in the dental amalgam, it can actually go into the blood and then circulate into your liver and into what are called motor neurons in your spinal cord. And motor neurons actually are responsible for muscular action. So anytime you move, bat an eyelid or just move your arm or whatever, it's due to a motor neuron. If the mercury accumulates in motor neurons, it can actually damage the DNA and other structures, and it can, if it does it to a certain degree, it could cause what's called motor neuron disease, where most of your viewers probably know what it is. It's called ALS as well, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. So it basically it's fatal. It's fatal. I suppose the most famous person that's ever had it is Stephen Hawking, but he didn't really have motor neuron disease per se. He had primary lateral sclerosis, which a lot of people don't differentiate. They sort of like just bundle it up into one category. But he had something similar to ALS. And so we were looking at whether we exposed mercury vapor to these mice that had these two genes knocked out that actually were sequestering heavy metals. And then we had a look at, we had to sacrifice the mice and look at the nervous system. And there was a bit of an effect that the mercury had caused on the peripheral nerves of the mice. And so I published that thesis based on the outcomes of the experimental work. And we got 6 publications out of it, which is, you only really need 3 for a PhD. But we had double the amount of publications.
So that research must have been deemed quite important. And I know with my generation, the last of the baby boomers, that all that ever happened was mercury amalgam fillings. And I had quite a lot of them before I was 20 years of age.
Yep.
And I think a lot of us may be suffering the effects of that in the future. It's quite an incredible thing that you would put such a toxic metal into one's mouth.
Yeah, I mean, people used to have gold fillings, but even before our time. But basically, if you're born in the 60s, 70s, 80s, you would have had a lot of dental amalgam in there, and it is highly toxic. And when it becomes mobilized, every time you chew, you let off a little bit of mercury vapor off the amalgam, and then if you breathe that in, that can actually end up in your bloodstream and in your motor neurons.
Wow.
But, we didn't prove that it was actually causing motor neuron disease, but we proved that it did have an effect on the nervous system.
Sure. And everything's accumulative, isn't it? So,
it's
enough of that. Doesn't matter where it comes from. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So people listening and watching at the moment that have got mercury fillings in there, what would be your best advice? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people going, I don't want to know about the UFO thing till I resolve my dental problem. What would be the best thing for them to go and
just leave them? Because if you take them out, it means that you're going to let a lot of mercury vapor into your bloodstream. So there's nothing you can do unless you extract the tooth and put an implant in there. So that's quite expensive. So most people just leave them in there. There's nothing you can do about it. It's just that subsequent fillings. Nobody does mercury fillings anymore that I know of in Australia.
No.
But and probably due to some of my work and somebody else's work, my supervisor's work. So and it's well known worldwide that it's really bad putting it.
Does mercury ever leave the body once it's? I'm sorry to run over you. Does mercury ever leave the body once it's accumulated in there?
Well, that's a good question. We haven't really tested whether the mercury can be found in feces or urine. Although I think there's probably a little bit of elimination through feces. I'm not sure. I don't think urine because I don't think anyone's ever detected it in urine, or just I haven't read a publication about it. But once it gets in there, and once it gets in your motor neurons, it stays there permanently. So your motor neurons are as old as you are. So when you develop as a fetus, you have a certain set of motor neurons. Half of them die off, and half of them stay there when they need a muscle, when they send an axon down to the muscle. And they're as old as you are. So once one dies, that cannot be replaced, because if you can imagine, a motor neuron can have an axon that's a meter long. If it dies, how do you replace that? Because it's such a big cell. So, and once the mercury's in there, it stays there for the rest of your life.
Wow.
How with aging do we keep that plasticity within the motor neurons? Is there something in our diet we can do? Is exercise assist? How do we keep that plasticity? I'm worried about myself here, Roger. I'm worried about myself.
Oh, we're all worried.
I think it's too late for us now.
It's too late for me too. Yeah. I feel like I'm forgetting people's names and things, and I'm thinking, Jesus, have I got dementia or something?
You know what I put? No, I put that down to you just know so many people. You've met so many people. You've got so much backlog in there that you just got to sit. It takes longer to sift through.
It's very reassuring.
It's true.
So is there, just quickly, is there some way that we can actually make those?
I think, solving crosswords and, just keeping your mind agile in terms of cognition, by doing certain things that reading, exercise is good as well, I think. But there's only you're limited to a certain amount of plasticity in your brain, because there's only certain areas that, like the hippocampus and where cells are regenerated, but not, there's not a great deal of regeneration in your brain, unfortunately. If you lose neurons, that's it.
I'd say then that distinctly the field of research you've fallen into, and for all of us, is one way to keep that neuroplasticity occurring, because it really is an enigma, and it's a riddle. And maybe now is a great segue to step into that incident. Now, your parents had a rural property. Maybe tell us about that if you want to tell us the location, and then tell us the circumstances.
Yeah, so I think I was about 14. It's such a long time ago that I don't think I remember the year, but it was probably late 70s or mid to late 70s, and I'm showing my age now. But basically, they had a rural property out there that's recently been sold to the Badgerys Creek Airport, and Mum's living with me now, but they had a property out there which was 10 hectares. And very rural. Adjacent to that, there's a 1,000-acre property which was owned by Royal Prince Alfred Hospital, and I think it was recently sold. But if you can imagine, the farmhouse was on the road, and further back was the dam at the back, and then you've got a bit of a hill, and you've got just nobody around. There's a neighbour on the right-hand side when you're looking east on the hill, and but it was very I suppose isolated for something that's not that far away from the centre of Sydney, in the western suburbs.
What I should maybe do for our national and international audience predominantly here is, and excuse me, I'm sort of lagging a bit behind this morning, is that we're actually broadcasting from Sydney, Australia. We need to acknowledge
oh my God,
the elders, past, present and future, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and that we're broadcasting from stolen land, and at some stage we need to give that land back, because I think the height of this mystery, this enigma we're researching, if we were actually had some respect from our Indigenous community due to the colonisation that we've lost completely, we'd probably be closer to an answer.
Maybe.
Because I think they've lived in harmony with the land, and they've always had a relationship with the stars. And the other thing I need to say is that you're a keen astronomer and cosmologist, and we'll talk about that a little later on. So how far away from Sydney is this land that you're talking about?
So it's about 35 kilometres west of Sydney. And it's sort of like not at the foot of the Blue Mountains, but about, I think, maybe 10 kilometres east of the Blue Mountains. So it's flat land, and there's a lot of agricultural activity that used to go on in the 60s and 70s and whatever. And my parents used to have, they used to grow a lot of vegetables there. We had cattle. And so one day, I was pretty bored as a young kid, and being so isolated out there. I had, it's very hard to get Joe Blow down the street to come over and play with you and whatever. And I was constantly going down to the backyard, going down to the back paddock and skipping stones on the dam or doing something else. And it was late evening, and I think it's like getting onto summer, because I remember wearing thongs and shorts and looking at the dam, and it was getting dark, and I just saw this, it was a light, and I thought it was a star on my right-hand side. And I've told this story umpteen times on podcasts, so sorry for the repetition. But
that's right. We haven't heard it.
I saw it coming from the right, and I'm facing east and where the dam is, and I saw this light coming towards me from the south, and I thought I was could be just a plane on the corner of my eye, and then I saw it moving and then just getting slightly larger, and I thought, oh, that's really unusual. What the hell's that? So it came up, stopped right in front of me, and this is about, I don't know, 300 yards away, 300 meters away, above the hill, started glowing, and then did a crazy maneuver, and then sort of like shot down and landed not far away from me. I'm not quite sure whether it was behind the hill or in front of the hill, and it scared the crap out of me, because I sort of like thought, I've never seen anything like this. It's definitely not a meteorite. It just stopped mid in the in the sky.
Yeah, the hovering's always a problem, isn't it?
The hovering's a problem.
When they hover, you know it's something else. Yeah.
I've heard of instances where people are called meteorites, of lights that go back up into the night sky.
And there was no sound with it, Roger, at all?
There was no sound at all. And typical of most UFO sightings, people don't hear sound. And it just grew, and it got to the stage where it was about half the size of the moon, so it was huge, and it was just growing. It's like an
remarkable.
I couldn't see any structure, and then when it landed, I still felt like it wanted to interact, but I just was not having a bar of it. So I just took off like the wind and just ran back to the farmhouse as fast as I could. I really kicked myself for not staying there, because I sort of thought, oh my God, this would have been so interesting to see what would happen, get a closer look at it, see whether I could interact with it. But it just scared the crap out of me. Nothing on earth. I was just...
You'd be so aware that that's another extraordinary consistency when people are investigated deeply, that they all feel something personal is occurring here. And this object in a way is speaking to them and wanting to interact with them, which is really quite extraordinary. So no sound, very close observation, landing. You've had what you could call a close encounter of the third kind there.
Yeah. It was, all I can remember is that it basically had a, I don't know how to put it. It affected me. It was only probably less than a minute, the whole thing, but I've never forgotten it. And it happened so long ago when I was a lot younger, and it changed my life. But how can something so short in duration change your life that way? I don't know how something can be that monumental in your life, in the sense that it can have an effect like that on you. And
that's another consistency that people speak about, that something was short-lived and what could be easily passed away as insignificant, easily debunked, becomes extraordinarily significant. And I think it's something deep, resonant within our intuition, our DNA, that we know that we've had a profound moment here, and this is going to stay with us. But as you said, it's also, you're unprepared for something like that. And what it does is it makes you then question the whole fabric of three-dimensional reality, consensus reality. You literally have a collapse around that philosophical perspective of life.
Well, that's what happened to me when I thought of, your brain goes through all these combinations of permutations of what it could be, and that's what we do as field investigators in MUFON. We try and eliminate everything that it could possibly be. And yet, when I was there, I sort of thought, well, it's not a meteorite, not a plane, not natural phenomenon. What is it? It could be extraterrestrial, and that's what really got me going. It got me really quite concerned, frightened. Oh, is this thing what is it gonna do to me? It was a life-changing thing, and that's what really got me obsessed about the topic. I started reading books about it. Initially, my sister's husband's uncle had this book that lent to my sister, and I decided to read that. And when I started reading things about UFOs, at that age, I didn't know whether it was fiction or non-fiction. And I started reading a lot of books, and I thought, my God, this is non-fiction. I thought it was fiction, but no, it's actually, most of the books that I read had all these facts about UFOs, and that's what sort of got me obsessed. I thought, oh, you can actually research this stuff. And so later on, that's when I joined APRO, which I wasn't I couldn't do anything. If you're a member of APRO, I mean, they're in America and we're here. All I received was a newsletter from them. So I really wanted to get involved in something like MUFON, where you could actually become a field investigator and interact with people that have had similar experiences with you.
But I think that shows that you had very perceptive chops early in the piece, because APRO was one of the most well-respected or UFO research organizations in the world. And was that, correct me if I'm wrong, was that Jim and Coral Lorenz?
Yeah, Jim and Coral Lorenz, yeah.
And so people search out their literature, because they did some great investigations over there, and accumulation of novel. And I don't think I've read one book from them that sort of steers into the fantasy world. It's just really quite astounding. So, and that was about 19. How old were you when you joined APRO?
I would have been about maybe 17, I think.
Right.
I can't remember what year it was, but and this is pre-internet, so and resources were really hard to find. I don't know how I actually managed to find that this was an organization, because I must have read it in a UFO magazine when I was at uni. Every time I'd travel by train from my parents' place to on the Red Rattlers to Sydney Uni. And when I got off at Central or Redfern, there'd be stacks of magazines there where you could pull up buy a magazine on UFOs, and I'd be reading through that. So that'd be your main source of information in terms of where you could join organizations.
I think you had to do some fairly extensive research, but like me, I had that incident at school, and one of the things I want to ask you is, did you ever feel the need to later on bring researchers into that incident, or look up information around that area and see if other sightings and people were having similar incidents at that time?
No, I didn't, unfortunately. I think I might have. I'm not quite sure, but I think I lodged my sighting with APRO. But I'd have to check that. But I don't know. Maybe they haven't got that. I
was identical, and now I kick myself. Bill Chalker was looking around some similar things that occurred when I had that incident at school, but I only ever in my teenage years vaguely spoke to someone else that vaguely remembered it, and then I dismissed it. But the one thing I did is do what you did. I went to the literature, and I was astounded of the amount that this subject matter was so ridiculed out in the public domain. But when you started to read the literature, you realize there were highly qualified people on the boards of these research groups that were fascinated and turning up what looked like profound evidence, ground trace evidence that was scientifically reduced and put into papers. And that's one of the brilliant things about MUFON, is that their extensive cataloguing and documenting of these incidents.
Yep.
So I think, where did it sort of lead from there?
So from there, I read a lot. So I'm a bit of a late bloomer, you might say, for research in ufology. So in between when I joined APRO until about the mid 2000s, I suppose, I was basically reading a lot and reading books, and that's all I'd read. I would not read anything else apart from UFO literature. And basically, it's a steep learning curve, as you know. There's a lot out there, and to get that experience and the knowledge behind the topic, I did a lot of reading. And until I started, in '87, I sent there was a book that came out in '87 or '88, Timothy Good's Above Top Secret, where he had some allegedly secret documents published in the back in the appendix. And the reason I stumbled across that is because I was doing a course in electron microscopy at TAFE in Sydney. And I lived in Newcastle at that time, and I, on the way back home, because this was an evening class, and on the way back home on a train, I found this newspaper that was sitting on next to me, and I thought somebody just dumped it. So I picked it up, started reading it, and I found this tiny little article on it saying something about a crashed UFO, and I thought, well, this is really interesting, crashed UFO, and it said something about Timothy Good's publication. So I immediately rushed out to the bookstore and tried to find a copy, and no one had a copy apart from this one bookstore in Erina on the north coast, Central Coast. And so I rang the book agency, and I said, the book company, and I said, look, can you keep a copy for me? So, because I'm in Sydney, and I'm in Newcastle, and I've got to go down and pick it up. So they kept a copy for me, got it, and then I started flicking through it and found this document which related to the Eisenhower briefing document. Yeah, that one there.
Yeah. So this is really interesting, this document, but that book we also have to steer people towards, because I think it's a brilliant piece of literature, and it sort of tied everything up into one volume. Timothy Good, a profound researcher. Is he still alive out there? I should have checked that.
I think he is. I've only
heard anything.
He was a concert violinist.
He was a concert violinist,
Yeah, and that's sort of, and again, so have a look for that book. But this document ended up in the hands of US documentarian Robert Emenegger and Jamie Chanderay. And this is one of the highly contentious documents that William Moore was playing around with early in the piece at MUFON. So maybe tell us about this MJ12 incident, but also there's a very interesting story about you getting in touch with Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
Yeah. So basically, again, this was prior to internet, and I managed to get their address. And what I did, I Timothy won't be happy with this, but I photocopied the part of the briefing document and sent them. This is in '87. Sent them a copy of it and saying, never mentioned UFO, and I can't find the damn letter that I kept a copy of the typed letter that I sent them, and I've lost it. But basically, I sent them, can you please explain, sort of like letter, what is this? And they sent me back a reply within 2 weeks. I couldn't believe it. And this is
that's pretty fast for back then.
That was really fast, and I thought, wow, because I had a bit of an epiphany when I read it. I thought, oh my God, this is. And a lot of people are saying that all of the MJ12 papers are rubbish. They're just forgeries. And when you look at them, and Stan Friedman, I contacted Stan and spoke. By email, and we, I discussed some of the documents with him, and he was convinced that the Cutler Twining memo was real, and that the possibly the Eisenhower briefing document was also real. But you can chop and change things. You can, as other researchers have said, some of these documents could be real documents that have been cut and pasted to make look as if they were hoax. But some of the information is real, but some of it's fake. So it's hard to say what's that if you label it as real, it's got elements of hoax in it. If you label it as a hoax, it's got elements of reality in it, like
and it falls again into the area. Well, it falls into the area of supposition, but it's what we were discussing with Robbie Graham. It's that subtle, a lot of reality is out there, a lot of truth is out there, but they're perception managing this.
Yeah.
I think the problem with the ufological conundrum, the entire spectrum of the paranormal world, is that it cuts across cultures, generations, finance, qualifications, and they can't keep a lid on it.
Yeah.
So I think one way to keep a lid on it is to actually take people away from what they might consider deep classified information or getting too close to the truth by altering and playing around with these things. All of us in the research community know that when we started to see names like Donald Menzel, who it becomes very Shakespearean, he who doth protest. I mean, here's someone who wrote some of the earliest books debunking the phenomena from a scientific perspective, but absolutely ludicrously in terms of what you'd investigate the cases to be. So when I see a name like that, it makes me instantly go, hey, there is some truth to these documents after all.
Yeah. People like Menzel, they say that he could have been possibly involved with the CIA, and he was a government shill. So then people were surprised that he was listed as one of the MJ12. But now there's more information that's coming out, and MJ12 has been mentioned in a lot more things that are coming out now. In particular, some of the new documents. I mean, I think the Wilson memo, I think, mentions MJ12, and there's more documents that are coming out now that are mentioning this organization. So I think there is. I mean, it makes sense to have a cabal of a handful of people to put the lid on this, that know everything about this subject. But and to a certain degree, I can understand why they want to keep a lid on it. I mean, it's frustrating for us UFO researchers, but basically, what would happen if we really did know the truth, the entire truth about this matter, to open up Pandora's box? What's going on with the cattle mutilations and even the human mutilations that some people mention, the abductions, all this sort of stuff. Maybe there is a really valid reason why they want to put a lid on it and just control it.
Well, I think also it's a big crack in consensus reality, and there's just too much to consider about how opposite to the world we've been sold, that this whole range of phenomena could actually affect things. And again, it's just supposition. But the bottom line for me has always been, if you're taking a great swag of the taxpayers' money and you're investing that in the military, and then all of a sudden you've got your Air Force saying, look, we are in charge of the airspace, but something's flying in that's beyond our reach. We can't do anything about it. Possibly it might take you from the bedroom late at night, and it might bring you back if you're lucky. There are, all of a sudden it's going to be a massive conundrum, and people are going to go, why did I pour all of my tax money into the Defense Department
when you can't defend us?
So from a grassroots proletariat perspective, it does make sense. But the trouble is, this phenomena is on a day-to-day basis is affecting people's conscious lives that are thinking people. And as you said, all you need is one tiny amount of time where you're actually in the midst of this occurring to realize there's a massive crack there, and it's going to change your life completely. So let's go back to what happened with Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And I think, really early in the piece, crash retrievals were deemed pretty ludicrous by the scientifically based ufological community. But there was one person who strongly saw the reality of them that was behind the scenes in the US gathering lots of evidence, and that was Len Stringfield. So I don't know if you actually read any of Len's books. This is actually now today you can purchase, don't go to Amazon, find it somewhere else, it's too expensive, but all his status reports have been put into one volume for the public, and there is astounding evidence there. But I think this was one of the first books in the mainstream ufological world that actually took us into the reality of crash retrievals being a distinct possibility.
I sort of knew about Len Stringfield, but I haven't unfortunately read his books. He had this. I remember he had this little black book that he used to. He called it his little black book, where he would interview people on the basis that he would not divulge their names or their circumstances, basically. So he obviously built up a trust with his interviewers, interviewees, which could then divulge a lot of the information to him without being identified. And so I think a lot of the information that he got about the crash retrievals came from people, who had this information that couldn't really do it any other way, couldn't divulge it any other way, but going to someone who they knew a lot about the subject and who was interested in the subject and who actually could keep their confidentiality.
I love the fact that your inquiring mind early in the piece, you were a provocateur. So what you're going to do is you're actually going to get in touch with Wright-Patterson themselves and see what actually happens. That is incredible research. Now, from your scientific background, let's have a look at this whole notion of cattle mutilations, because that is a really extraordinary thing.
It is, and I think everybody thinks it's predominantly an American thing, that only cattle mutilations happen in America, but they don't.
And I spent time on the Nullarbor, and I actually was hard pressed to find people out there on land that hadn't had an incident. Didn't necessarily have to be with their cattle, but their sheep, kangaroos, even cats. And I think that one thing we should actually say to people, because this is quite frightening, and I think the pioneer of this research was the PBS journalist Linda Moulton Howe and her documentary Strange Harvest in 1978. There is something distinctly odd here, and when you bring science to bear, just like the crop circles, you realize that this is not something that's occurring by people late at night doing all sorts of nefarious things. It distinctly looks like science has been brought into the field. So let's have a word to you about that. Are you all right to go there now?
Yeah. I go pretty well way back when as a teen. I remember the very first book I ever read was about Snippy or Lady.
Snippy the horse. Yeah, 1967, that case.
Yeah. I read it in the 70s, in the late 70s, probably just before I started uni. And I was fascinated that this horse was found in a paddock with as if its head had the flesh around the head had been removed, as if he dipped it in acid. And I don't know. I read one of the first books I read on animal mutilations, and then I never really researched it until I saw this documentary on. I think it's a channel. I get the channel wrong. I think it's a Channel 7 documentary on the casino cattle mutilations that occurred in the 70s.
Right.
And
so this is a picture from that, isn't it?
I believe so.
Yeah.
Okay. And so basically, or that could be a generic photo. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right.
I don't know whether
I mean, while that photo's up, I'm just going to point out, if people are naive to this, and most people aren't, but what we're looking at here is like these extensive laser type cuts and soft organ removals, like the tongue and the
gone, the eyes are
rectums
gone.
appear to be clawed out, and they're not what a scavenger or predator would have done in the field whatsoever. I mean, it's a great waste of the
meat.
Yeah,
it's hamburger.
You can put it that way. Anyway, go on. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay. What was I saying? Basically, the casino cattle mutilations that occurred in the 70s, and I got into contact with some of the ranch hand, not the ranch, that's an American expression, the farm hand, who was there, and he told me some of his experiences where he would. He was one of the suspects that the police was looking at, that they thought were causing these mutilations. So he was quite nervous about it, and he said, "Look, I didn't do anything. In fact, he tried to work out, what was going on. So one of the experiments he did, he had some cattle in a yard, and then he put this green string on the gate, where if you open the gate, the string would break." And they found one of the cattle had been mutilated in a yard where the string was not broken. So something must have got in and done its job and then gone out without actually going through the gate.
So not using any conventional method that like a predator or a human being would be able to do. Yeah,
exactly.
Interesting.
And there's instances where cattle have been found in different paddocks. The interesting thing about this is I spoke to a veterinarian that actually looked at a lot of the mutilations in that casino incident, and I said to him, I said, "Look, I can't mention his name because he doesn't want me to mention his name."
Fair enough.
I said, "Look, what's your explanation as to how this can occur? Because we've got cattle that don't appear to be struggling when this thing happens to them. They have flesh removed that looks pretty precise. It could be laser, it could be just a surgical excision, and they're usually exsanguinated, which means that the blood's being taken out, and there's no footprints, there's no nothing." And he said, "Look, the only thing I could think of is that somebody had a pea shooter and had this drug called something or other. Anyway, it's sort of like a curare type drug, and if they shot the cattle with this drug out of a pea shooter, and then they just sort of like drop, and then they do their mutilation." I sort of thought, well, that sounds as fanciful as something coming down from the sky.
Still no footprints around the cow.
There's still no footprints around the cow. So
to say, okay, so they did that, and then they went in and did the incisions.
Yeah, he came up with this explanation, and I said, "Look, I don't think that's plausible explanation." And he says, "Look, I don't really know how these mutilations occur, because basically when they take the flesh off, there's also a layer that on the bone that's not taken off. And if it was a predator, or if you were using a knife, you would take this layer off the bone, which is called periosteum. And they seem to be able to, or whatever is doing it, seems to be able to take the flesh off the animal without disturbing this one very tiny one cell layer type membrane of the bone."
And you know what?
That's what really,
Sorry to interrupt you here, because it's just hit me with a point in terms of people that have the abduction scenario and the scoop marks on their body. And that, again, it would be good to investigate, and I'm sure this has been done, that I think that layer, in terms of those scoop marks, is left intact when the material around that layer has been removed, which gives you the indentation on the flesh. And, people would be aware in the research community that these abduction narratives are just not a story. There is real physical evidence on the body
accompanying them
and around that individual, and these scoop marks are one of them. And I think there's an incredible similarity there that I will have to look up in my research. So sorry to interrupt you. It was just an epiphanous moment for me. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah. So, and what you see often in these cattle is what's called a jaw swipe, where they take a piece of flesh and expose the teeth. And not quite sure, but they so we can see a jaw swipe here. We can see the flesh has been removed around the cheek, and then to expose the teeth. Not quite sure what's going on there. So and this is a sort of happens everywhere around in various countries around the world. The same sort of pattern where you have this cheek swipe, and then you have anal coring. You've got eyes, tongue removed, ears sometimes removed, udder removed. Some of the cattle in Queensland, in Casino that I was talking about, I think one of the an unborn calf was mutilated in the womb of the cow.
Wow.
Which, how do you do that? That's just ridiculous. So, and the cow was mutilated, and her unborn
calf
was
so
mutilated because they
did
pulled
they
it out.
find?
They had it.
All right, but did they find like how they'd gone into the uterus to mutilate it? Was there any evidence of?
Don't know.
No,
That's all the information that I got told by Barry, who was the farmhand, and
but it was done in utero. Is that right? The mutilation was done in utero.
Done in utero. But I mean, there's even like more bizarre things where people. I mean, Linda Moulton Howe was saying that some of the cases that she saw had organs that were the consistency of like the liver or the brain with the consistency of peanut butter, in these cattle that were mutilated, and they somehow removed an organ with no visible exit hole, like a keyhole surgery type thing. And they don't know how that could be possible. And also, animals like scavenging, and animals that are scavengers don't touch these carcasses after they've been mutilated. There was a recent incident where there was a goat that was mutilated. I'm not quite sure whether it's not a classical mutilation, but I got this. Somebody told me about this incident in the north coast of what was it, Queensland or New South Wales? I'm not sure. Where this lady posted something on her Facebook where a goat had its entire leg removed, and I said, "Well, it's not classical, animal mutilation." But when she showed me the photos, she said that it had no blood in it, and basically it was drained of blood, and it had its leg removed around the pelvic region, and you couldn't see any blood there, and it was as if the entire leg was removed without any disrupting anything. And there's other instances where sheep have been mutilated that I've been given information about in Victoria, and the cattle mutilations that are occurring in northern Queensland and northern New South Wales, which they're bizarre. I mean, we still don't know after since 1967 how these things, how these mutilations are occurring with a lack of evidence in terms of footprints, in terms of anything being there, and how are the cattle mutilated when there's no signs of struggle? Does it happen when they're alive? Are they somehow immobilized, and then this procedure is done, the blood's removed, and then they collapse and like they're dead?
So are you still getting animal mutilations now? Reports now?
Yeah, that was the goat that was mutilated recently.
Right. Yeah.
But I think that people don't. I think she realised that when she posted it on Facebook, somebody said, "Oh, that looks like an animal mutilation," and that's when she sort of said, "What's an animal mutilation?"
Right.
And said, get in contact with me, and that's how I got to know about it. But I'm sure some of these instances will not be reported by farmers.
Well, I think the bulk of them won't be reported. There's a tenacious quality to people, especially the work off the land. And I've found that consistently in going out and doing field research. And they're going to deal with the problems no matter how esoteric they are, and not really trouble anyone else about them. And when you start to get, people have common sense. You're out there tending, where the Knowles case occurred in 88. the Mundrabilla homestead was 1 million acres of land. Who are you going to call on? You have to go off your own resources. So they just deal with it. And if it's something incredibly esoteric, well, it's always going to stick in their mind. But are they going to rush out to the local vet? Are they going to get in touch with other people? In a way, it's counter to everything they've ever done. I think one thing we should do here is that, a few cases have bled out over the last few decades, and especially out of South America, speaking about this occurring to people, but they're very minor. And I am always trying to remove as much fear around this subject matter as possible. My wife and I are not searching for an answer or even a hypothesis, but we want to make sure that science is brought to bear on this subject matter and that people have somewhere to cathartically release these as stories, not necessarily to report and document them, but to actually know they've got support. And what they're seeing might be called supernatural, paranormal, is really quite natural. The other thing in the mutilations, if I can just digress back, is that the blood is removed, but the tissue is heavily cauterized. And that can't happen easily out there. That's not going to happen in a predator kill or someone out there doing a ritual sacrifice.
Well, you can kind of see when either a wolf or a wild dog or something is chewed on some, the hind leg of something. You look at it.
It's usually fur that's been ripped off and blood.
Yeah, that's a predator that's gotten to this and chewed on the back leg. But when you look at a mutilation and an animal mutilation, it's like you can see that there's been some sort of a surgical procedure performed on that animal, and that's where it, that's the difference.
But I think what we should do is talk to you about maybe those couple of human cases have been brought up. One of them with extremely hideous photographs, and how unfrequent they are in terms of the rest of the phenomena, and the fact that and people should go, if they've never seen it, have a look at that groundbreaking documentary, A Strange Harvest. I'm sure it's probably sitting out there somewhere on the internet for you to have a look at. But tell us about these recent cases where it's stepped over into actual human beings.
Well, the very earliest case that I read about was, I think, James Pete Lovett, who was a guy in the U.S. Army who went out with another guy. I don't know. Sorry, I haven't read.
That's all right.
Read about
just
this
talk around
recently.
it generally.
Yeah. So basically, the two of them went out looking for parts of airplanes that had. I'm not quite sure where they were looking at, but it was some man-made stuff that was on the ground. In the desert somewhere out in the States, and basically they had come across this spacecraft that he was on one side of a dune and his partner was on the other side of a dune, and then he heard his partner scream and then or make this horrible sound as if he was being attacked by something. And he looked over the dune and found that there was this flying saucer that had this rope-like object around his partner's leg, and that was pulling his partner towards the craft. And he obviously couldn't do anything because he was thinking, what's happening here? I can't do much. So he went back to the base and then got some other guys back over and found the body of this guy that had been mutilated like a typical animal mutilation with
Wow.
I'm not sure of the details of how they're not specific as to what the mutilations were, but he was found dead and released by this craft and had inflictions on his body that were similar to animal mutilations. And that was in the 1950s.
Is that the one we've seen the very graphic photo of where the eyes?
No, that's another guy that there was an incident where, and I can't pronounce the name of the dam that was found on an island in a dam, and I think in a region in South America, where his body was found with mutilation similar to the cattle mutilations, where he had a cheek swipe, and he had what are called petechial hemorrhages. So petechial hemorrhages are where you can inflict trauma to a body and prior to death, and what you get is these hemorrhagic spots on the body, and basically before you die, so your heart's still pumping, and it's releasing blood into areas of your tissue that are damaged, and you can see them as we call them petechial hemorrhages. And so this guy would have had this procedure done on him, whatever it was, to extract certain organs out of him. He had certain lymph nodes that were taken out of him. He had, I think, a testicle removed through his urethra, and things like that. It was just really quite weird. And he had the cheek swipe, and he had so all this happened while he was alive, and then
that's right.
And then you die. But I shouldn't be laughing. Sorry. But basically, it's interesting how and whether these injuries are fatal. Obviously, if the blood's taken in your body, it's going to be fatal. Like if you get totally exsanguinated, you've got no blood in your body, that's what's going to kill you. But whether these lesions that they're actually if they're taking out a cheek swipe, or if they're removing something from your body, they're not a vital organ, because they don't remove vital organs necessarily. A lot of the time they're just taking soft tissue parts, but that's not going to kill you. So it must be, I don't know, it must be the exsanguination that's going to kill you. And why they want to kill you, I don't know. But he was found in yeah. Sorry.
Again, that's all assumption. I don't want to take you into fields that we're not incredibly versed in, because you've done so much great field research, and I want to see where your science has come to bear on this subject matter. But just quickly at the end of discussing this, and also I want to remove that fear. So these are very few cases that we're seeing, and yet we don't have incredible evidence to back up to know that we're actually looking like something that is linked to the cattle mutilations. And the other statement I should make is that why cattle mutilations? Well, in tandem with these incidents, people have seen lights, they've seen objects, they've seen all sorts of things that seem to happen contemporaneously to these things occurring when they get to the livestock. Just from your science perspective, have you come up with any idea of why this is happening? Why would this be occurring?
Yeah, I've been asked that question before, and I really don't know. I mean, basically, soft tissue is required for whatever reason. I mean, I've heard of other people speculating on this. Some people are speculating that they were looking at outbreaks of mad cow disease at one stage, and it was the government. I don't believe that's the case.
Makes no sense.
It makes no sense. And also, people are saying that some of the researchers are saying that they could be using the soft tissue in experiments. That this is the extraterrestrials are using the soft tissue in experiments for I don't know, cloning or something to do with underground bases, and them using soft tissue to I don't know, culture cells for hybrid development. That doesn't quite make sense to me.
You know, that's all very humanistic kind of thinking. Do you know what I mean? I mean, we don't even know, what these things are.
Yeah.
So how would we even start to perceive what they're thinking, what they're doing? We have no clue.
I mean, the other thing is, a generalized extrapolation is, they're doing exactly what we do with livestock and animals on this world. They're tagging them and keeping an eye on them and seeing their development or whatever. From a scientific perspective, is it the soft organs? If you were trying to understand soft tissue, the softer organs, if you were trying to understand what we've done since we actually split the atom, if you were trying to look at the accumulation of background radiation, is that actually contained in the soft tissue more than anywhere else in the body?
Usually, radiation falls on your skin, and I don't know whether you've probably seen videos of people of the when the U.S. Army sent out guys in the fields when they were exploding, nuclear weapons.
I've seen them when I was nursing, Roger, when I sent people early in the piece at Royal Prince Alfred Hospital, and they would come back burned by radiotherapy.
Yeah. So basically, I think the initial radiation falls on your skin, whether you inhale it or not. I suppose that's one way the radiation can get into your body. But soft tissues, I don't know. I suppose it could, the radiation could get onto surfaces where if it falls on your skin, it can only just lie on your skin. Whereas if it's in your mouth, you can ingest it, you can inhale it, you can, and I suppose most of the soft tissues either around your mouth region
or your intestine. Would it accumulate in those areas?
To be honest, I don't know. I'm not quite sure.
All right, let's move on to an astounding case that you investigated, and you can give us the background on this case. And this is just a great example of your scientific expertise being taken into the field. And I think it's another example of, like, there is a danger in this phenomena. And this is sounds so contradictory because, I want to remove the fear and the ridicule. But I think also one of the important factors that, out there from a proletariat, non-scientific perspective, that we need our awareness raised about this phenomena, because it not only psychologically devastates lives, but at times it can even kill people. So let's have a look at this case. And this is from New Zealand, I believe.
Yep. So this, so you're talking about this. This is a vehicle that was driven by a couple in New Zealand in, I believe it was 2013 when the incident occurred, and it was in the Canterbury region of New Zealand. So they were driving to a farm where they were being paid to work on this farm. So it's a boyfriend girlfriend in the front seat. It was early in the morning, so it was still a bit dark, raining but not heavily. And they were going through on their way, and there was an oncoming vehicle, like a white utility, that was coming towards them. But after that vehicle had passed, there was an object that actually pierced through the windscreen of this car at great velocity, killing the actual driver, going through the interior of the vehicle and back out through the rear windscreen, and then to who knows where, because the object was never found. Now, you might say, okay, well, this could well be something that's fallen off the utility. There's been a lot of instances we can see, cam footage of unfortunate instances where stuff comes off a truck or whatever. Especially if they're traveling at great velocity, an object can come off a truck into the windscreen of a car and then kill the occupant. But usually the object is found within the car. This object was never found. It went in through the windscreen, hit the driver in the face, caused a fatal injury. So it would have had, an enormous velocity to have done, crash through the windscreen, kill the guy, went through the back of the car and was never found. And there's no real suitable scenario to actually account for the fact that the object, it must have been an airborne object under its own control, because basically otherwise how could it have gone through the rear windscreen? How did it have enough velocity? Look, it would have lost inertia when it hit the windscreen. Would have lost inertia when it hit the occupant. Would have lost inertia when it hit the rear windscreen.
Yeah.
And how did it go from the windscreen to the face of this guy and then to the back? Apparently, there was evidence. Now, I could be wrong, but there was evidence where it hit other parts of the interior of the car before it went out. through the windscreen, the rear windscreen. So, and it was never found. So,
so is this a shot of the police looking for it?
This is a shot. So at the back there, you can see the cutoff road coming off the main road to your right.
Yeah.
So that's the Tijuana cutoff road there. And so the incident occurred just shortly after that cutoff road, where this object came flying through the windscreen. And these are police officers looking for the object in the nature strip there. And there were 400 hours were spent trying to find this object, and multiple police officers, and nothing was found. Nothing as if to indicate that it could have come off a vehicle. Nothing that, if something comes off a vehicle, it'd have to be like, to hit the windscreen at that height, it'd have to come off quite a distance off the road. So we'd expect to have a large truck, or a semi or something like that. But this wasn't. There was that passing vehicle. It was about the same height as the Subaru, and there was no indication that anything came off that Subaru that hit the road. And the Subaru's mentioned because it's the only explanation that the coroner could come up with, that something come off that vehicle. The owner was stopped, and the guy said that, he was found, and he said that he had his canopy on. And how would an object scale even if he had something in the car, right, in the ute, how would it scale the sides? And if he had his canopy, just say he was lying and he didn't have the canopy there, how would it scale the sides and then go at such velocity to go through the windscreen and kill the driver? And then, because he wasn't traveling that fast.
No.
He was probably traveling about 60k an hour or less.
Right.
Because it was, it was raining. The conditions were terrible. And, it's just, when I first heard about it, I thought, it's just something, it's just something's come off this vehicle, obviously, and hit the car. But when you put two and two together, when you research it properly, it just doesn't make sense.
So did the female, the passenger see anything? Did she see anything that
she said that she saw something like the shape of a tissue box, but and like a grayish, beige colored thing, and as it went through the windscreen. But it's difficult for her.
And was that illuminated?
Sorry,
was that illuminated?
She didn't say it was illuminated. So this is just quoting what she said. But then again, we did some research, and we the shape of the entry, like the entry point, indicates that it should be like a roundish object and about 8 centimeters in diameter. So we're looking at something that could be, even you can eliminate drones, because a drone would be just smashed up in this instance. I'm talking about 2013. Drones were out then, but they were pretty primitive sort of drones. And so the evidence indicates that it was probably a round object, and it was about 8 centimeters in diameter. And what I did, I looked up. I thought, that sounds like an orb, and I thought, well, let's see whether anything, there's been sightings of orbs. And I did some research into our database, and sure as heck there was. There were orbs that were reported around about a few days before this incident occurred by people that had reported MUFON and in the MUFON database. So,
and an orb, just to qualify that, an orb is something similar to the Earth-like phenomenon we have in this country, like a Min light. They can be highly contradictory. They can be incredibly small, and then they can actually be rather large. But there's so many. There is thousands of incidents of people seeing that light phenomenon in Australia, and I take it in New Zealand as well.
We've had instances where people have caught them on dash cams in their cars as they were driving, and there's this one guy in Melbourne, South Australia, who has picked up a lot of them, and you can see in the video how quickly some of them travel, and they're traveling at close to supersonic speeds. You're talking, like close to like thousands of kilometers an hour. So it makes you wonder whether this thing had come in at a rate of knots and hit the windscreen and just flown out of the car and just taken off.
The major scientific anomaly there is no impedance of that inertial velocity and then having other objects. I mean, we're looking at something similar to the magic bullet here, aren't we? I mean, here's the reality is how absurd is that? Because once that velocity has hit a surface, it's distinctly impeded.
It has to.
But when we have a look at some of this footage coming out, the UAP footage that's appearing, we're actually seeing objects there. They are hitting the water, and their initial inertial velocity under that water is not impeded. They come out of the water at the same rate that they went into it.
Exactly. Yeah. It's transmedium. I can't remember what the exact. It's transmedium velocity, I suppose they'd call it, where they can enter from space into our atmosphere without any impedance, and then from the atmosphere into the water without any impedance. So, I mean, who knows what sort of technology.
There goes the law of physics there. Now, the other thing is you've been involved distinctly with this case and trying to get information out. Tell us about what's happening there.
Okay, so we first of all wrote to the police for the file, and
is this the right information?
No, that's the Eric Davies.
Okay, we'll speak about that.
That's okay. So I don't think I've given you anything.
No,
okay, all right. Just jumping the gun there.
So we wrote to the police, and they said, "Oh, look, it's such a large file. What in particular did you want?" And we said we wanted the whole file. And they said, "Well, no, there's issues with privacy, and but the actual incident was published in numerous articles with the names of the two individuals that were involved." And so we said, "Well, like this has gone through, it's posted everywhere on the internet. So why are you saying we
what
can't
privacy?
Privacy?" And then they said, "Okay, it's things to do with the actual incident, that not the actual names of the individuals involved, and that involved privacy issues." And I thought, what could possibly be private about an issue that's occurred? So they sort of like appeared that they was trying to stonewall us, and then they actually asked the family whether we could have the files. This is Darren and myself. Darren's the lawyer in New Zealand, and he can put through FOIAs and whatever, because I can't. I'm an Australian citizen, so I can't do that. But they said no, and then the family said that they didn't want to give out the information either. So we went and we spoke to the Minister of the Minister of Defence, I think. And sorry, I haven't.
That's all right. Don't worry about
this recently.
There's a lot of information to keep in.
Yeah, and basically the police minister, and basically he said that it would cost us, a certain amount of money to go through the files and redact certain things that they didn't want us to look at and whatever. So we were stonewalled by them as well, and now we went to the ombudsman and complained and said, there's really no reason why they should be holding back these files. But it makes you wonder, because and still it's with the ombudsman. So I emailed Darren about a few weeks ago saying what's happening, and he said, look, it's still with the ombudsman. We're still waiting. He's had contact with his secretary or whatever, his personal assistant, and she said that they received our request and they're still looking at it. So this is from July, I think, 2018. It's been going on.
But did they have like a coronial inquest into the death? I mean,
they would have had. They did.
And what were the findings? What were the findings?
Okay, so there's not much information about it.
Right. Okay.
On the internet, there's very little, and I don't have access to the coronial findings. The coroner basically just said there's only really one scenario, and that is that something fell off the back of that utility that that went past them at the time at 60 kilometers an hour with sides and with the canopy.
But that's a dreadful accusation to make on that poor utility driver that he's got to run around with that guilt for the rest of his life.
I know, but he wasn't fine. He wasn't charged or anything, and because one would think that he would have been charged with negligence or
of course.
But he wasn't. So I think they're at a loss as well, because I mean there were several institutions that were involved. Otago University Geology Department was involved. There was U.S. Army was involved as well.
Really?
I don't know how the U.S. got involved. I don't know how they got involved.
Because something fell off the back of a ute.
Yes, and the U.S. Army was involved, and also they actually destroyed the car. So we've got no evidence now. We've only got pictures of what it used to look like, and they've obviously taken certain things for forensic evidence, like the part of the windscreen that was smashed in.
That was
isn't that interesting?
Gone.
I mean,
you can see the windscreen there's been cut out.
Yeah, it's been cut out.
You know. Yeah.
Isn't that so fantastic that I heard murmurs when I was in Munrabilla around the Knowles case that the federal police that appeared all seemed to have American accents. And then do you hear out at Westall that there was anyway, look, none of these things occur in isolation. There are consistent incidents worldwide, and there was one in the States. Can you tell us about that, where the US police department actually housed this car? This car is in a museum and has been in there since this incident. It's incredibly similar.
Yeah, it is. It is similar, except that the police officer that was driving, I think his name was Val Johnson. He was driving on the freeway, and he saw a light in the paddock, I think, and the light then made a diversion, went on the road, and it was just one light, and he thought, I wonder if that's a vehicle now coming towards me that's got missing one light. And then he just blacked out, and he came to, went on the radio and found this, what you can see there, a little dent in the windscreen, and certain other things that happened to the vehicle, which were quite unusual in the sense that this light or this object had hit his vehicle and done this damage, but the damage can't be explained easily. So we're looking at possibly another orb that had hit his police vehicle.
So what did he black out of? Why did he black out?
I don't know, because
that's weird.
If you've got like that sort of damage, wouldn't black necessarily. You wouldn't black out with a, it looks like like something like a rock could have hit the windscreen or whatever. So it's unexplainable. No one's really adequately explained why he blacked out. Whether he when was this case from? Off the top of my head, I think it was 1967. I think I'm not sure. I'd be corrected on that. Sorry.
Yeah,
I've got so much in my brain that I can't.
That's entirely fine, and that's information I've kicked up, and I just want people to know that none of these profound incidents happen in isolation.
Never a one-off.
Look at the reportage, and it's worldwide. That is just, and there you've got a great case where your science comes in handy. Tell us, maybe give us a couple of other cases that you've given us some info for here, where you've had to use your field investigation skills and your science in tandem.
So basically, so you're talking about the MUFON stuff?
Yeah, well, whatever. Whatever.
Yeah. I could talk about things that I've pursued some what I call extracurricular UFO activities, which are not to do with MUFON, and most of them involve well-known cases like the Petit Richan photo that was taken in Belgium in 1990.
This is a remarkable photograph.
Yeah.
Was there footage with this, or these were just a series of
no
still
footage?
shots?
It's just that one photo. The guy only had three frames left in his camera, and apparently his girlfriend was out in the night walking the dog when she came back, she saw this object. Went inside and told her boyfriend, who came out with his camera, his 33mm SLR, and then just took 3 photographs, but only one of them turned out. And this is the photograph he took. And the problem with this photograph is that it was called a genuine. It was actually touted as one of the best photographs ever taken of a UFO ever.
Now, did GPAN investigate this shot? Was GPAN's like the European equivalent of NASA? I'm sure there was analysis done on this shot initially.
There was. NASA did look at it. I think, what was his name? It's the tip of my tongue, but I can't remember.
Don't worry about names. Let's just keep rolling on what
So basically, there was a NASA guy that looked at it, and he said that basically these striations that you can see here in these lights are unexplainable. Basically, it's unusual how you've got these light, not the middle one, the red middle one, but the ones on the ends of the triangle. You've got these striations that look like similar to a double slit experiment with an electron, where you get the interference pattern happening. And he was saying that basically this can only occur under a huge gravitational field, electromagnetic field. So basically, they were saying that they can't actually call this a hoax. It's like it's a genuine photograph, and it was known as a genuine photograph for quite some time until 2011, or 2010, when Leslie Kean had published her book UFOs and Government and Generals, and whatever the title is.
And please search that book out, people. It is one of the most remarkable books, and it's copped a heavy beating in the public domain. For all the wrong reasons.
Leslie included this photo in that book, but unfortunately, the person who actually took the photograph said that he hoaxed it. So from 1990 to 2011, he said that it was real, and then from just before Leslie published her book, he called it a hoax. And I contacted him. I just happened to be online, and I managed to see, I don't know, I researched his name and found out that he had a Facebook site. I befriended him, and when I was online, all of a sudden in the chat, I had this question. He put this question mark and said, "Why did you befriend me?" And I said, "Well, I know that you took this photograph of the Petrosian UFO triangle." And he goes, "Oh, yeah." And I started chatting to him. He's he can only speak French, so he had to translate everything that I was saying in English. And so I just assisted him by just writing in French. And he was saying that yes, it is an original photograph, and it isn't hoaxed. But then he went on Belgium TV in 2011 and said that he hoaxed it with a bit of styrofoam and some LED lights that he colored in with a texture.
What?
And when you look at it, so basically, I asked him, "Why did you do that? Why did you say it was a hoax?" And then he said, basically, because I was paid a lot of money to do that.
He actually stated that to you. And paid money by whom?
Well, possibly a debunker. I'm thinking there's debunkers out there that will pay big money to debunk things, and a lot of them don't probably like Leslie Kean. And I think the timing was impeccable. She's just going to release this book, publish this book, and I said to Leslie, I said, "Look, I think it's just too much of a coincidence that he's turned out, come out and said that it's a hoax." And he told me that he was gypped of money because initially, when it was published, that he was supposed to be given some money to actually get published in the journals and whatever, various magazines and whatever. And he said that he never got that money, or he got less than what he wanted. But he might have got a lot more. He told me he got a lot more money by calling it a hoax, and at the time when Leslie was publishing the book. So, but if you look at that photograph, it is extremely difficult call that a hoax, and NASA's looked at it.
Well, I mean, we're not looking at LED and neo magics here, and as you said, those striations from a photographic perspective with a digital camera, or even with it's emulsion film, isn't it?
Because it's 1990. 1990.
Was it earlier, wasn't it?
No, 1990. That photograph was taken.
1990.
Yeah.
So you're looking at emulsion film.
An emulsion film, yeah.
It's very different. Yeah.
Styrofoam, mate. Yeah, right.
Yeah. And it just shows you that, not only have we got like this whole contamination of the truth through popular culture and perception management, that there does appear, you can assume that there is a concerted effort to suppress anything that's actually going to be seen as really scientifically based evidence to support this phenomena from getting out there. Quite frightening.
Yeah.
Now, tell us about James Ridney. What's this about? Is it Ridney?
Yeah. Oh, James Ridney. Yeah. James Ridney. Yeah. So basically, this is James and myself. I got in contact with James through Facebook initially, and I was just interested in his connection with the EWD notes, which are the Eric Davies notes, which is a document that was found by James in Edgar Mitchell's files. So Edgar Mitchell was an astronaut, as you know, who died, I think, in 2000.
Is this part of the document or not?
That's the one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Tell us
you know all about this, Jamie.
Fascinating.
So basically, these notes were taken by an astrophysicist by the name of Eric Davies, and people in the UFO community know a lot about this. But just for the viewers that don't know all about it, these notes were taken from a meeting between Eric Davies and Admiral Wilson, who was Joint Chief of Staff in the Pentagon at the time, and it's got the date. Is it 2002? Is it? Yeah, 10th of the 16th of October 2002. So these are notes that Eric was either jotting down or off his top of his head of his memory when he had this meeting between Tom Wilson in the car park at the back of the EG&G building in 2000, in whatever year it was, 2001 or whatever. So the significance of this document is that there was mention of a special access program, which are programs within the Pentagon that the public don't, even officials within the Pentagon don't know about. And being Joint Chief of Staff of the Pentagon at the time, Wilson knew about this, or got somebody hinted of this special access or unacknowledged special access program that he didn't have access to. And he said, well, I'm Joint Chief of Staff, I need to be looking into this, I need to be in charge of this. And the thing about this, or USAP, or unacknowledged special access program, was that it was dealing with reverse engineering of an off-world vehicle that had crashed, or we obtained, or the Pentagon had obtained by some other means. And that caused quite a stir, because basically it's a document that was written by someone that's very credible, an astrophysicist that's got a good reputation, who met with an admiral and was discussing this topic about, he couldn't get access to it. He tried. He actually got in contact with the people that were in this organization who were in charge of this special access program, USAP, and he wasn't given access because he wasn't on their, inverted commas, bigot list, which gives a list of people who are actually can actually work on this special access program. And so he got the shits, and he said, look, he got into contact with Oak Shannon, who was an intermediary in this instance, and who Oak used to work with Los Alamos National Laboratories, and he got the two together, and he says, I want to talk to somebody. And the whole idea was, I think, that Wilson wanted to disseminate this information to the public,
right,
in a covert, covert sort of way, by giving this information to Eric. Eric noted it down. He either tape recorded it and then reviewed the tape and then typed it up, and then gave it to Edgar Mitchell. Edgar Mitchell filed it, and then when he passed away, James had a contact in the United States who actually went through the stuff because they were going to just throw it out, and they contacted Edgar's daughters and said, "Can we access it?" Because the daughters just didn't have much to do with their father because they were estranged from Edgar, unfortunately, and they didn't care what happened to his stuff. So they were going to throw it out, and then James said, "No, don't throw it out. We want to go through it." So the contact in the United States sent James a package with a whole pile of documents, and James just went through them gradually and found this document, the EWG notes, which was just like, wow, this is, if there is a smoking gun, this is it. Stating clearly that there was contact between a government official and a very well-known, respected astrophysicist in a conversation that clearly states that there was, it probably still is, a special access, an acknowledged special access program that deals with reverse engineering, or even just the fact that they had materials or a craft that they were looking at. So much for the reverse engineering part, because apparently you have to have the same level of technology to be able to reverse engineer something like this. We're nowhere near that. So, but the fact that that this information was discussed between these two individuals indicates that there's something going on there, and basically we're still looking into this, and James is still part of this, and now there's notes that have been written by Oak Shannon that have been discovered by another podcaster that again confirm, give more credence to this other document that Eric Davies is. I contacted Eric Davies early on in the piece, and he refuses to comment about it as to whether these documents that are allegedly written by him are legitimate or not. But there's so much evidence to indicate that they absolutely are.
This should be a much more groundbreaking story in worldwide ufology than what it is.
Well, it is gaining traction, but also it was tabled in the last congressional hearing on UFOs.
That's right, it was.
Mike Gallagher, who was a Republican senator there. So it's gone to the level where it's being tabled in Congress in the United States, the actual document. So also, the more evidence we get, the more stuff that comes out tends to support the provenance of that document even more. You expect, if it was hoax, the more information you get, the more it's going to point to this being a hoax, when that's the opposite. That's actually,
and it certainly supports the verbal evidence that Edgar Mitchell was talking about. He grew up in Roswell himself.
Yes.
He said he had a lot of inside contacts. He knew that they were doing things like they had metamaterials and they were reverse engineering. So I think that's extraordinary research, and good on you. You don't seem to have any fear when you actually come across a story of going right to the source and getting on top of it.
Oh, isn't that what a researcher is?
Yeah, that's incredibly what a researcher is. We'll get to your work with MUFON. Unfortunately, I think we're going to have to do another show with you very soon because there's just too much information. This is a photo you sent to us that I've always been fascinated in, and I actually even had a model of this at one stage.
Oh, really?
Can you tell us about the provenance of this photograph? And, it's a photograph I've always looked at whimsically and thought, how could this have any validity at all?
Yeah, look, I saw this photo in the early 90s, but when I looked at it, I thought, oh my God, that looks weird. I thought, I thought, is that a creature? Because anatomically it appears to be something that's actually living. And I didn't think much of it, and then I thought, recently I thought, let's Google it up again, see whether I can. And it's called, he's called the Silver Man because he's got this like a metallic sheen of silver over his body. And
so do we know when this photo was taken?
There's been speculation about it being taken in the 40s,
Right.
but it was published in 1950 in a German magazine, which I can't pronounce. I'm pronouncing
Okay.
the name.
Yeah.
But as a hoax, so it was published on April the 1st, 1950, I think.
Right.
And that meaning that, look, this is a hoax, but we don't know who the photographer was. The photographer's never come forward. We don't know anything about the provenance of the photo, but one thing that struck me about this photo is that it was similar to the description of two men holding an extraterrestrial entity at the Cape Girardeau incident in Missouri of a crashed UFO in 1941. And there apparently was a photo taken at that time, and there's a lady called Charlotte Mann whose grandfather, who was I think his name was Hoffman, who was a Baptist minister, actually was called out at the incident to give I don't know that I'm not quite sure, but he I don't think Baptist ministers give the last rites, but anyway, to this alien. Really? And basically he went out there and did what he did to save the soul of this creature, and was told never to say anything to anyone about it. But there was a photograph that was circulating around, and Charlotte Mann, his granddaughter, was shown it at the dinner table one day, and the photo was lent to someone, and basically it was not found or not returned. But I tried to contact this lady to find out whether this was a similar photo to what she had seen, but she's ruled it out because she's saying she was interviewed by Leonard Stringfield, of all people. We spoke about him a while ago, but I don't know when Len had spoken to Charlotte about this. But she adamantly states that this is not the photo she had seen, but her drawing of the photo is almost like very similar to this, where you've got two guys with
it's virtually identical. I think I've seen it myself, that drawing, and it's virtually identical.
The men in the photograph that I've seen, the drawing that she's done don't have trench coats, and there's no women there. But there's remarkable similarity between the two photos, but she's denying that this is the photo she had seen. But the thing that strikes me about it is the creature. When you look at it anatomically, it looks correct, and it doesn't look like a doll, doesn't look like a figurine, or it looks like a real creature. And
somebody said it looked like yeah. I've heard people say that it's a shaved monkey, but
it does not look like that at all.
Because its arms aren't long enough and its legs are too long. Do you know
anatomically,
what I mean?
there's no way that's a monkey. It's not. It's so much. It's so human that it looks so human. But the problem is its the proportions, and it's tiny, and it's not a child.
And it's wearing boots.
And people saying, bizarre. "Oh, it's got boots." Yeah, I know. But the thing is that this could be part of a prop to make it look like a hoax. But the thing is anatomically, I can't work out what this thing is, and I'm pretty good at anatomy because I teach it. And this thing looks weird, and that's when I contacted Isaac Coy, who's got a website. He's a lawyer, he's a barrister in the UK. We don't know his real name. He comes under the pseudonym Isaac Coy, and he's got this website where he's done a lot of research. But also, Len Stringfield had a look at it, and also I think it was J. Allen Hynek that called it a shaved monkey. But then, he's been known for his swamp gas theory as well. And,
he was having a problem there in the 60s with the US military.
He was. But I'm still stumped with this photograph. I don't know. It could be a thing where this could be a real entity because it's pre-digital, pre-everything, and it could be the only real entity that we've ever, that could be hidden in plain sight, so to speak.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of
it's been labelled a hoax, but
I think there's a lot of material hidden in plain sight. And one thing we were speaking with Robbie Graham about, who wrote Silver Screen Sources, is that extraordinary docudrama feature, UFOs, The True Story of Flying Saucers. Now, 1955, it is probably the best documentary ever made on the subject, especially for its time. It had 2 pieces of 16mm footage analysed by the Air Force and proven to be at that stage anomalous, that they tacked onto the end of the film. And the mere fact that it's just got lost and forgotten and sits back there in history, those 2 pieces of footage look very similar to the Tic Tac footage that we're seeing today. So I think you could be onto something there, Roger, and we need to evaluate what's been there in the past as well, because I think there's an abundance of evidence. And when you're dealing with emulsion film and footage, you can actually analyze this stuff even better than what we can do with digital. So I think that researchers need to step back and value the history that's gone before. Can you briefly, before we end here, tell us about what it takes to be the director of MUFON out here, and the credentials and the extensive work you go through in MUFON to be a field investigator?
Well, we don't have to. Well, you don't have to have qualifications necessarily. I know people do PhDs in the field of ufology, and there's one Australian that's done it. But I certainly don't have any formal qualifications when it comes to the study of UFOs, and very few people do. But on the basis that I had joined as a field investigator a while ago, I had done a number of cases. So I'd actually, what we have is a database where people put reports in, and then as field investigators, we look through their report, contact them either by mail, phone, or do an online thing like this, and we go through their sighting, and we try to eliminate all the possible other things that it could be. If it's a video or a photo, or if it's just an account, we can go through all the little bits and pieces of the story and take it apart, analyze it, and try and come up with a reason other than it being a UFO. The reason being is that we want to eliminate all the different possibilities that it could be in terms of prosaic terms, in terms of is it man-made, is it a natural phenomenon, etc., etc. So we've got tools that enable us to do that. Software that enables us to eliminate aircraft, eliminate satellites, eliminate natural phenomenon, etc., etc. But if we're stuck, if we cannot eliminate that report or that sighting as something prosaic, then we call it an unknown, which means that we cannot classify that, identify that object, and it officially becomes known as an unidentified flying object. We can't prove it is an extraterrestrial spacecraft, but we have done the research to say that that's what it is. So in terms of how I became national director, I basically worked very hard and went right into my reports, and I think that was impressed by the way I had presented my investigations in each case, and the extent that and the time that I put into it, which I don't do to a great degree these days because I've just done so many of them. And usually I can just tell what an IFO or an identified flying object is straight off the bat, and I don't need to do the necessary legwork. But they're impressed by that, and the then national director had health problems, and she had to resign from that position, and then she suggested me, and that's how I became national director. And we've built up since then. We've built up. We've got a lot more field investigators. We've had one that's just qualified. They've got to sit for an exam. And this is my website that you're putting up here. So we've got a Facebook site that's got about over 6,500 followers now.
Wow.
So basically,
so people can actually get in touch with you through this Facebook site.
Yeah,
this
they can get in touch with me directly through the Facebook site. Through MUFON, you can't. The database is only there for reporting things, and if you're an Australian, you can do a report. It'll come to me. It comes from the United States. They control what goes out, but we also do international stuff. I report stuff from New Zealand as well, and so we're building up our field investigators. We've got a lot more field investigators than we had before, and we have monthly meetings, and we're thinking of actually including the public in our monthly meetings.
And we would love to assist you with that.
I was going to ask, is the information that you collate and collect, who does that belong to?
That belongs to MUFON. So all the everything's, So you can get some of the information off the database if you're not a member, I think. But the analysis is hidden from general public view.
Okay.
I don't know why that is. It's just that it is. It just is. You'd have to ask the director.
And look, the public out there would be well aware there's been a lot of controversy around MUFON in the last decade or so. I mean, the sale of MUFON in the public arena was a shock to people. Robert Bigelow at some stage owned it, and it became... There was a History Channel program based on it. Can you tell us the name of that? I've forgotten. It slipped me. Was that Hangar?
Hangar One. Hangar One.
Hangar One. I think it lasted 2 seasons.
No, it wasn't Hangar 11. Hangar One. I think.
No, Hangar One.
Oh, it doesn't matter. People will look it up, and it's based on the MUFON database, and it was quite an extraordinary show and revealed a lot to the public. But I think that, and I know that Moira McGee was working for MUFON at one stage. So there's been a lot of noise around that signal. But as far as I'm concerned, I still own annual reports from MUFON, symposiums. I find MUFON's data, probably like your scientific work, incredibly meticulous and very scientifically based. That shows the accumulation of it shows that there's genuinely a real phenomenon we're dealing with.
Yeah, we do go, out of our way to make sure that we investigate properly using, scientific, logical means of investigation. We're not going to speculate. We just, we take everything. I wasn't say face value, but we take on board the report and analyze it. We use various techniques to do that. We're not going to jump to any conclusions. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, I think it's really important that you actually do go public at this point in time to dispel a lot of that noise that has occurred around it in the last decade or so, but also to give the public access. The one problem with this material is the fact that most of it does get cloistered into certain UFO groups, and UFO groups
never see it again.
Have people running them. People think they're about to break the greatest story known to mankind. They're the only one that's had experience with it. We've had a lot of strife. I've had to run from virtually every group I've been involved in for fear of my life and my mental health at times. But I think that, the best thing you can do is get that out there publicly, and we'd love to assist you with any of that.
Yeah, that's
I think this is a good place to actually go to report, if you've seen something, and maybe try and get an idea of if it is a natural phenomena or man-made, whatever, or if it is truly an unknown.
Exactly. And I think, what people will learn from this podcast, and I guess many others, and the TV series that's coming up, that you are a gentle person based entirely in science, and you don't bring any bias to the field. Now, one thing I do have to ask you at this point in time, because we're running out of it, what do you think we're dealing with? You seem to lean more towards the ET hypothesis. Do you think this is... Tell us about that and why.
What I base my opinions on, I do believe in the extraterrestrial hypothesis for these sightings that are some of the sightings that are called that we classify as unknowns, on the basis that we do allegedly have bits of material from these craft, and there's evidence pointing that we do have an actual craft, so we have nuts and bolts craft. And I think it makes sense to join the dots and make that leap to say that we cannot be the only intelligent creatures that have evolved on a planet in our universe, which is ridiculous. I believe that there's millions, if not billions, of civilizations out there that are much more advanced than we are, that have gone through evolutionary development to the extent that they have they know physics a lot better than we do. They know a lot more about quantum fields and quantum entanglement in terms of communications, and can get from one point A to B within seconds. They've developed that technology through their understanding of physics. So I think that absolutely that people from other civilizations could actually visit us here on Earth, and I think that's what's occurring. What you're seeing in the night sky or in the day, or that are unusual objects that look intelligently controlled, that move at hypervelocity speeds and can't be explained by prosaic means, have to be. There's no other explanation for them not to be advanced civilizations from other parts of the universe. That's all I can say.
Okay. The one thing that's happened to me is I've tried to move away from a hypothesis as this becomes so expansive. And the more deeply you investigate, and that's not to say, I mean, Robbie Graham even said it. He said the ET hypothesis could be absolutely correct, but there seems to be a lot of other complexity going on here. At one stage, we'd look at the angle of elevation, and then when we started to talk to the eyewitnesses, what you said before, they felt there was something personally occurring with them. And then incidents that could be deemed paranormal started occurring at home. They were having poltergeist activity, clocks were stopping, and things like that. So even if it is the ET hypothesis, it seems to have some extraordinary relationship to who we are deep inside. And I think that the notion of what you brought up there, quantum entanglement, sometimes these things do appear to be morphing right in front of us, appearing and disappearing. Is it a series of parallel dimensions? None of us will really know unless dedicated scientists like you come into the field. And I know how much money, personal money and time you've thrown into a field without much reward. And I want to thank you on behalf. We're running out of time here.
Because I need to ask Roger about a couple of shots that he sent me.
Okay, but we also need to thank Roger and say that people can get in touch with Roger quite easily.
MUFON,
through that site.
Roger
is one of the most gentle, egalitarian, caring people I've come across.
Absolutely.
And he will certainly be unbiased in how he deals with the information. Just quickly, Roger, one last question from me. How many reports do you get on a weekly basis?
On a weekly basis, I could tell you on a yearly basis, it's about 120.
Okay.
Right. It varies on a yearly basis, but it's a bit sporadic when it comes to looking at things on a weekly basis. Because some weeks you don't get anything. Some weeks you get like 3 reports, so...
We started in the pandemic to literally be getting a report a day. How many of those reports would you deem remain an unknown on a yearly basis?
On a yearly basis, it depends on the investigator.
She's just hit me and called me a bitch because we're running out of time. She wants to go to these photos. Let's run to them.
Okay. Well, let's go.
Because we'll go over time. We can't edit it.
Yeah, because you don't just do this. You do have some downtime, and in your downtime, can you explain this photo? There?
Wow! This is me at where were we? We were at the Gasoline Pony in Marrickville.
Okay.
So this is This is the band that I was in. So acoustic band with a double bass player.
What were they called?
Violinist. Sorry? Oh, Ionia.
And is that recently?
Oh, it was a few years ago. This is. I'm looking younger there, so it's probably around about 10 years old, maybe less.
And does Ionia still play?
I don't think so. They've gone through a lot of.
Well, you're not in it.
They've gone through a lot of vocalists, a lot of violinists, and So basically, they're the two guys. The one in that's playing the classical guitar and the double bass player are Greek.
Mm-hmm.
And
what sort of music? What sort of style?
It's sort of like gypsy folk type stuff. And so the guy that's the double bass player, the lyricist.
Yeah.
And this
what
is
about this one?
This is Voices from the Vacant Lot. So
so what is Voices from the Vacant Lot? That's you right?
We're like a choir, but we're not really a choir in the strict sense. We're a band, but we've got we've got vocalists that we classify as sopranos and basses and baritones and etc. So we do a lot of harmony, and we pick a song and we reconstruct that song, remake that song into a version that's suitable for our performances based on acoustic and we use djembe drums and a few other things, but we don't have any stringed instruments or anything like that.
Okay.
So
you do have
the
fun.
band's been around for a long time, but I only joined in 2011, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And,
all right.
We're going to have to cut this short.
We're going to have to cut it short because
it's nearly 2 hours.
And we are so proud and privileged to be your friend and have you up on Untold Radio down south. Anomalies. If you want an incredibly meticulous researcher that can actually sing at your wedding, get in touch with Roger.
I won't be able
and
to do
an UFO sighting.
All right.
All right.
We'll catch you all next week. Thank you, Roger.
You just hang there,
Thanks,
Roger,
guys.
until these are over. And we will be back next week with another interesting guest.